The massive space station hung in the void like a silver flower, its 12 petals stretching toward the stars. Each petal belonged to a different species, their unique architecture telling stories of distant worlds and alien minds. Ambassador Jake Morrison walked through the human section, his footsteps echoing in the metal corridors that felt so familiar compared to the strange organic curves of the other. Species areas. Jake was a tall man with graying hair and tired eyes that had seen too much of galactic politics. He wore the simple blue uniform of the human diplomatic corps, a stark contrast to the elaborate robes and ceremonial armor worn by the other ambassadors. Behind him walked Lieutenant Lisa Hayes, a young woman with short brown hair and alert, green eyes. She carried a datapad and watched everything with the careful attention of someone who knew that details could mean the difference between peace and war. They entered the Great Council Chamber, a vast dome where representatives from 12 different species gathered to decide the fate of the galaxy. The chamber was designed to accommodate everyone, from the towering crystalline Zephyrians to the small aquatic Feltari, who needed special water tanks to survive in the standard atmosphere. Jake took his seat at the human section, a modest area compared to the grand platforms of the older species. Humanity had only been part of the galactic community for 50 years, making them the newest and least respected members. The other species often treated them like children who needed guidance, or worse, like dangerous animals that needed to be controlled. High Counselor Vexthara rose from the Zephyrian platform, her crystalline body catching the light and throwing rainbow patterns across the chamber walls. She was beautiful in the way that living diamonds might be beautiful, but her voice carried the cold authority of someone who had never been challenged. "Fellow beings of the galaxy," she began, her words translated instantly by the universal communication system. "We gather today to address a growing concern that threatens the peace and stability we have worked so hard to build." Jake felt Lisa tense beside him. They both knew what was coming, but hearing it spoken aloud still felt like a punch to the gut. "The humans," Vexthara continued, "have expanded to 17 worlds in just 5 decades. Their population grows without restraint. Their military forces increase every year. Their culture spreads to other species, bringing with it concepts of violence and aggression that have no place in civilized society." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. The insectoid Kethmori clicked their mandibles in what Jake had learned was their version of applause. The slug-like Morvans secreted approval pheromones that made the air smell like rotting fruit. "We have all seen the evidence," Vexthara said, activating a holographic display that showed scenes from human worlds. "Their entertainment glorifies conflict. Their sports involve physical combat. Their children play games that simulate warfare. They carry weapons even in peaceful settings and consider this normal behavior." The display showed clips from human movies, boxing matches, and military parades. To Jake, these looked like normal parts of human culture, but he could see how other species might find them disturbing. The Zephyrians had never known war. The Feltari solved disputes through meditation and song. The idea that humans might actually enjoy competition and conflict was alien to them. "Most troubling," Vexthara continued, "is their military expansion. They build warships at a rate that exceeds all other species combined. They train soldiers in combat techniques that are designed to kill, not to defend. They refuse to share their military technology, claiming it is too dangerous for others to possess." Jake's hand tightened on his stylus. The metal began to bend under the pressure, but he kept his expression calm. Lisa noticed and quietly placed a fresh stylus beside him. Taking the damaged one away, Trade Prince Zictal of the Kethmori rose next, his 6 arms gesturing wildly as he spoke. "The humans disrupt our carefully balanced trade networks. They negotiate aggressively, always seeking advantage. They create new products that make our traditional goods obsolete. They work too hard and expect others to match their pace." More murmurs of agreement. Jake noticed that none of the species mentioned how human innovation had improved their lives, how human medical technology had cured diseases that had plagued the galaxy for centuries, or how human engineering had made space travel safer and More efficient. Admiral Gloomith of the Feltari floated in his water tank, his translucent body pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that conveyed emotion. The humans cannot be trusted with unrestricted expansion. They are Deathworlders evolved on a planet so dangerous that it shaped them into predators. They see threats where none exist and respond with violence where patience would serve better. The term Deathworlders always made Jake wince. Earth was indeed a dangerous planet compared to the garden worlds where most species had evolved. But that danger had made humans adaptable, resilient, and innovative. It had also made them protective of others, though the Council seemed unable to see that. One by one, the species voted on the Deathworld Containment Protocol. The Zephyrians voted yes, of course. The Kethmori followed, then the Feltari, the Morvans, the Crystalline Althorians, and the gas-breathing Nebulan Collective. Only the Vorthan Republic, the Stellar Communion, and the Free Traders voted no, but their voices were outnumbered. The final vote was 9-3 in favor of the protocol. Humanity would be restricted to their current 17 worlds. No further expansion would be permitted. Human military forces would be limited to defensive purposes only. Human technology sharing would be subject to Council approval. Jake sat quietly through the entire proceeding, his face showing nothing but polite attention. When the vote was announced, he stood slowly and nodded to the chamber. "The human delegation acknowledges the Council's decision," he said in a voice that carried no emotion. "We understand the concerns that have been raised, and we respect the democratic process that has led to this conclusion." He paused, looking around the chamber at the alien faces that had just voted to cage his species. "Humanity will respond accordingly," he concluded. The other ambassadors seemed relieved by his calm acceptance. They had expected anger, protests, or threats. Instead, they got polite acknowledgement and a promise to comply. As Jake and Lisa left the chamber, Vextara actually seemed pleased with herself. None of them understood what they had just done. They had mistaken human politeness for weakness, human patience for acceptance, and human restraint for lack of capability. They had voted to contain what they saw as a dangerous predator, never realizing that the predator had been protecting them all along. As Jake walked back through the corridors of the station, Lisa finally spoke. "Sir, what did you mean when you said we would respond accordingly?" Jake's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his tired eyes. "Exactly what I said, Lieutenant. The Council has made their position clear. They don't want humans involved in galactic affairs because we're too dangerous. So we're going to give them exactly what they asked for." Lisa felt a chill run down her spine, though she wasn't sure why. Jake's words seemed reasonable, but something in his tone suggested that the galaxy was about to learn a very expensive lesson about the difference between being dangerous and being protected by something dangerous. The vote had been cast. The die was thrown, and somewhere in the depths of space, ancient sensors detected the political shift and began to stir after 3 centuries of slumber. The day Deathworlders ceased playing nice had begun. 3 months had passed since the vote, and the galaxy seemed peaceful. Trade ships moved between star systems carrying goods and passengers. Colonies continued their daily routines. The great space stations that served as meeting points for different species buzzed with activity. To most observers, nothing had changed after the Council's decision to restrict human expansion, but Captain Amy Rodriguez knew better. She stood on the bridge of the UNS Explorer, watching the stars through the main viewscreen as her ship completed another survey mission along the outer rim. Amy was a small woman with dark hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had been running scientific missions for 15 years, and she had never seen anything like what was happening now. "Captain," called her communications officer, Lieutenant Tony Barnes, "we're receiving another priority message from Command." Amy nodded and walked to her command chair. The messages had been coming daily for weeks now, all marked with the same classification code that meant absolute secrecy. She activated her personal screen and read the latest orders. Like all the others, it was brief and to the point. Continue normal operations. Monitor all alien communications. Report unusual activity. Immediately, be prepared for emergency recall. Amy closed the message and looked around her bridge. Her crew was a mix of humans and aliens, as was common on human ships. The Kethmori engineers Ixtala had been with her for 5 years. The Feltari navigator Swimlin had helped them avoid countless dangers in the dangerous regions of space they explored. They were good people, and Amy hated keeping secrets from them, but orders were orders. And something big was happening. On the other side of the galaxy, Dr. Alex Turner was having similar thoughts. He worked in the crystal laboratories of the Zephyrian homeworld, studying the way their living crystals grew and changed. Alex was a tall man with blonde hair and glasses, and he had spent 10 years learning to understand Zephyrian science. He loved his work and had always planned to spend his career here. That morning, however, he had received a message that changed everything. His research funding had been quietly transferred to a human university back on Earth. His equipment would be shipped to human space within the month. His position was being eliminated due to budget cuts. His Zephyrian colleague, crystal singer Thinvara, found him packing his personal belongings into a small box. Her crystalline form shimmered with the colors that meant confusion and sadness. "Alex, I do not understand," she said in her musical voice. "Your research is vital to our energy systems. Why would your people recall you now?" Alex looked up from his packing, his face carefully neutral. "I've been offered a position closer to home. The university thinks my skills would be better used there, but your work here is not finished. The hybrid power cores you designed are still in testing. Without you, we cannot complete the project." Alex shrugged and continued packing. "I'm sure you'll figure it out. The Zephyrians are very intelligent people." Thinvara's color shifted to the deep blue that meant worry. "Alex, this is not like you. What is really happening?" "Nothing is happening," Alex replied. "I'm just going home." Similar scenes were playing out across the galaxy. On the industrial world of Manufacture Prime, Chief Engineer Kate Sullivan received orders to train her replacement immediately. The problem was that her replacement was a Kethmori, who had never worked with the fusion reactors that powered the planet's factories. Kate did her best to explain the systems, but the complex human-designed technology was beyond what the insectoid engineer could understand. "The primary reactor requires manual adjustment every 6 hours," Kate explained, pointing to a series of controls that looked identical to alien eyes. "If the magnetic containment field drops below 85%, you have to reroute power through the secondary coils." The Kethmori engineer clicked his mandibles in frustration. "These systems are too complex. Why did humans make them so difficult?" Kate wanted to explain that the reactors were actually simpler than the old designs, but they required an understanding of physics that the Kethmori had never developed. Instead, she just smiled and continued the training on the shipping lanes. Between star systems, Captain Rick Thompson was having his own problems. Rick was a navigator who specialized in the dangerous hyperspace routes that connected the galaxy's most remote regions. He had been hired by the Kethmori to guide their cargo ships through the Maelstrom Nebula, a region where normal navigation systems failed and only human intuition seemed to work. Rick had just received his recall orders, but he hadn't told his employers yet. He knew that without him, the trade route would become impassable. The Kethmori had tried to train their own navigators, but something about human spatial awareness seemed to be unique. They could feel the dangerous currents in hyperspace in ways that other species couldn't. Trade. Prince Zictal contacted Rick's ship directly, his 6 arms gesturing wildly as he spoke through the communication system. "Captain Thompson, we must discuss the renewal of your contract. Our shipping empire depends on your expertise." Rick looked at his recall orders one more time before answering. "I'm sorry, Your Highness, but I won't be renewing my contract. I've decided to return to human space." The trade prince's mandibles clicked in alarm. "But you cannot leave!" "Who will guide our ships through the nebula?" "I'm sure you'll find someone." Rick replied, "There are other navigators in the galaxy, but none who can navigate the dangerous routes." "Rick, please reconsider. We can offer you more money, better working conditions, anything you want." Rick felt bad about leaving his alien colleagues in a difficult position, but his orders were clear. "I'm sorry, but my decision is final. I have to go home." Back on Earth, General Don Cooper was coordinating what appeared to be routine military exercises. Don was a tough man with gray hair and scars from his early days fighting space pirates. He had been planning these exercises for months, but they were anything but routine. Across human space, military fleets were moving into new positions. Transport ships were being loaded with supplies. Communication networks were being tested and retested. To outside observers, it looked like normal military training, but Don knew the truth. This was the largest military operation in human history, and it was about to change everything. In his secure office deep beneath the Pentagon, Don reviewed the latest reports from his field commanders. Human civilians were quietly leaving their jobs across the galaxy. Human businesses were liquidating their assets. Human researchers were packing up their laboratories and heading home. The galaxy didn't know it yet, but humanity was preparing for something unprecedented. They were going to give the Galactic Council exactly what they had asked for. If the other species thought humans were too dangerous to be trusted with expansion, then they would learn what it meant to live without human protection. Colonel Sarah Kim entered his office with the latest intelligence reports. "Sir, the alien species are starting to notice the pattern. Trade Prince Zikta has been asking questions about human shipping contracts. Several research facilities have reported sudden departures of human staff." Don nodded. "How long before they figure out what we're doing?" "Not long, sir. Maybe a few more weeks." "Good. By then it will be too late to stop." Sarah hesitated. "Sir, are we sure about this? A lot of good people are going to suffer when we leave." Don looked at her with tired eyes. "Colonel, the Council made their decision. They don't want us involved in galactic affairs. We're just giving them what they asked for." On the remote mining world of Titan 7, Foreman Bill Jackson was preparing for the night shift. Bill was a big man with calloused hands and 30 years of experience in the mining industry. He had been working on alien worlds for half his life, and he knew how to handle the dangerous equipment that extracted rare minerals from hostile environments. That evening, however, Bill received a coded message that made his blood run cold. Operation Homecoming was about to begin. Every human worker on every alien world was going to be evacuated within the next 6 months. No exceptions. Bill looked around the mining facility that he had helped build. Without human workers, the operation would collapse within days. The alien workers didn't understand the safety procedures. They couldn't maintain the complex machinery. They had no idea how to handle the dangerous substances they were extracting, but orders were orders. Bill activated his communicator and sent a message to every human worker on the planet. "Pack your bags, boys. We're going home." Across the galaxy, the Great Withdrawal was about to begin. The other species had no idea what was coming. They were about to learn that there was a difference between being dangerous and being protected by something dangerous. And in the depths of space, ancient sensors detected the shift in galactic politics, something that had been sleeping for 3 centuries began to stir, sensing opportunity in the coming chaos. The day Deathworlders ceased playing nice was about to enter its second phase. The message arrived on every human device across the galaxy at exactly the same time. It was simple, direct, and impossible to ignore. 3 words that would change everything. Come home now. Dr. Nina Parker was in her laboratory on the Zephyrion homeworld when her communicator buzzed. She was a small woman with curly red hair and hands that were always stained with the chemicals she used in her research. For 8 years, she had been working on hybrid power cores that combined human engineering with Zephyrian crystal technology. The project was almost complete, and it would have revolutionized energy production across the galaxy. Nina read the message twice, then looked around her laboratory. Years of work sat on the tables around her. Prototypes that had taken months to build. Research data that represented thousands of hours of careful study. She was supposed to just leave it all behind. Her assistant, crystal singer Melthara, noticed her expression. "Nina, you look troubled." "Has something happened?" Nina forced a smile. "I just received some news from home." "I need to take a leave of absence." "For how long?" "I'm not sure. possibly permanent. Malthara's crystalline body flickered with alarm colors. But the power core project is almost finished. We are so close to success. Nina began packing her personal belongings into a small bag. The prototypes would have to stay behind. The research data was encrypted and stored on human servers that would be wiped clean within hours. 8 years of work, gone. The project will have to continue without me, Nina said, her voice carefully neutral. But you designed the integration systems. Without you, we cannot complete the work, Nina shrugged. I'm sure you'll figure it out. On the other side of the galaxy, Captain Rick Thompson was having the final conversation of his career with trade. Prince Zictal. Rick stood in the cargo bay of his ship, watching Kethmori workers load the last of his personal belongings. Behind him, the hyperspace navigation equipment that had made him famous sat silent and useless. Captain Thompson, please reconsider, the trade prince begged, his 6 arms waving frantically. The Maelstrom Nebula route is our most profitable shipping lane. Without you, we cannot use it safely. Rick had tried to train other navigators, but it was hopeless. The ability to sense the dangerous currents in hyperspace seemed to be uniquely human. Other species could learn the basic principles, but they lacked the instinct that kept ships from being torn apart by the chaotic forces inside the nebula. I've left all my charts and navigation data with your people, Rick said. Maybe that will help. Charts cannot replace experience. Captain, name your price. We will pay anything, Rick shook his head. It's not about money, I have to go home. The trade prince's mandibles clicked in desperation. But why? What has changed? Rick looked at the alien he had worked with for 5 years. Zictal was a good being, honest in his dealings and fair to his workers. Rick felt bad about leaving him in such a difficult position, but orders were orders. Nothing has changed, Rick lied. I just want to spend time with my family. On the industrial world of Manufacture Prime, the factories were beginning to shut down. Chief Engineer Kate Sullivan had left 2 weeks ago, and her replacement was struggling to understand the complex systems that powered the planet's production facilities. The fusion reactors that Kate had maintained for 10 years were starting to malfunction without her expert care. Plant manager Grixinol was a nervous Kethmori, who had never dealt with a crisis of this magnitude. His workers were panicking as one system after another began to fail. The replacement engineer had tried to follow Kate's instructions, but the human-designed technology was too complex for him to understand. The primary reactor is overheating, reported the chief technician. The magnetic containment field is fluctuating, Grixinol clicked his mandibles in frustration. Follow Engineer Sullivan's protocols. Reduce power to 75% and reroute through the secondary coils. We tried that, Manager. The system is not responding as expected. The truth was that Kate's protocols were designed for someone who understood the underlying physics. The Kethmori had memorized the steps, but they didn't understand why those steps worked. When the system behaved differently than expected, they had no idea how to adapt. Contact Engineer Sullivan, Grixinol ordered. Offer her whatever she wants to return. We have tried, Manager. Her communication device is not responding. What they didn't know was that Kate was already halfway back to human space, along with every other human engineer, technician, and maintenance worker who had kept the galaxy's industrial systems running. The Great Withdrawal was happening everywhere at once. On research stations, human scientists packed up their equipment and disappeared into the night. On mining worlds, human workers abandoned their posts without explanation. On trade routes, human pilots and navigators simply vanished, leaving their alien employers stranded. The Feltari mining operations were among the first to collapse completely. Their underwater facilities required constant maintenance by engineers who understood both human technology and the unique challenges of working in hostile environments. When the human workers left, the Feltari tried to continue operations with their own people, but they lacked the necessary skills. Admiral Gloomouth floated in his command tank, watching reports of system failures across multiple worlds. His translucent body pulsed with the bioluminescent patterns that meant extreme stress. How many facilities are still operational? He asked his aide. Less than 30%, Admiral. The others have been forced to shut down due to equipment failures. What about the human workers? Have any agreed to return? No, Admiral. They all cite personal reasons for leaving. None will discuss returning to work. Gloomith had been one of the strongest supporters of the Deathworld containment protocol. He had argued that humans were too dangerous to be trusted with unlimited expansion. Now he was beginning to understand the true cost of that decision. The Galactic Council called an emergency session after reports of human departures reached critical levels. High Counselor Vexthara stood before the assembled representatives, her crystalline form dimmer than usual. "We are facing an unprecedented crisis," she announced. "Human workers are abandoning their positions across the galaxy. Our trade networks are failing. Our industrial systems are shutting down. Our research projects are being terminated." Murmurs of concern rippled through the chamber. The species that had voted for human containment were beginning to realize that they had made a terrible mistake. "We must contact the human government immediately," declared Trade Prince Zictal. "We must negotiate their return." "The human ambassador has been recalled," Vexthara replied. "Their replacement is a junior diplomat named Crispell. He claims to have no authority to negotiate changes to their government's policies." "Then we must send representatives to human space," suggested Admiral Gloomith. "We must make them understand how much damage their departure is causing." Vexthara's colors shifted to the deep purple that meant embarrassment. "I have already tried. The human government refuses to meet with us. They claim they are simply complying with the Council's decision." The Council chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The species that had voted to contain humanity were now trapped by their own decision. They had asked for human withdrawal, and they were getting exactly what they had requested. Junior diplomat Crispell watched the emergency session from the human observation deck. He was a young man with brown hair and nervous eyes who had never expected to be humanity's representative during such a crisis. But his orders were clear: be polite, be helpful, and give them nothing. When the session ended, several ambassadors approached him with desperate pleas for human workers to return. Chris listened politely and gave the same response to each request. "Humanity appreciates your concerns, but we are simply following the Council's guidance." The vote determined that human expansion and involvement in galactic affairs posed a danger to interstellar peace. "We are complying with that decision by reducing our presence to the minimum necessary level." "But we didn't mean for you to leave completely," protested one ambassador. Chris smiled sadly. "I'm afraid that's not what the vote said. The Council determined that human involvement was dangerous. We're just being responsible by removing that danger." As the last human transport ships disappeared into hyperspace, the galaxy began to understand what they had lost. The humans hadn't just been workers and researchers. They had been the engineers who kept the machines running, the navigators who charted the dangerous routes, the doctors who treated diseases that other species couldn't cure. The galactic civilization that had taken thousands of years to build was starting to crumble, and it had only been 3 months since the vote. The species that had feared human expansion were about to learn that there were far worse things to fear than Deathworlders. In the depths of space, ancient sensors detected the chaos spreading across the galaxy. The withdrawal of human protection had created exactly the opportunity that something had been waiting for. After 3 centuries of dormancy, the real threat was beginning to wake up. The day Deathworlders ceased playing nice had entered its most dangerous phase. 6 months had passed since the Great Withdrawal, and the galaxy was dying. Not literally, but the great civilization that had flourished for thousands of years was collapsing piece by piece. Trade routes that had operated for centuries were now abandoned. Industrial worlds that had produced goods for entire sectors sat dark and silent. Research stations that had pushed the boundaries of science were empty and drifting. High Counselor Vexthara stood in her private chambers on the Zephyrian homeworld, looking out at the crystal cities that had once glowed with power from the hybrid reactors. Now they flickered weakly, running on backup systems that were never meant to operate for more than a few days. Without Dr. Nina Parker and her human-designed technology, the Zephyrians couldn't maintain their advanced power grid. The outer cities have gone completely dark, reported her aide, Song Crystal Nymphara. We estimate that 60% of our population is now living without reliable power. Vexthara's crystalline form pulsed with the deep red colors that meant anger and frustration. What about the emergency generators? They were designed by humans, Counselor. Our engineers cannot repair them when they break down. It was the same story everywhere. The Kethmori shipping empire had collapsed when their navigators couldn't pilot ships through the dangerous hyperspace routes. The Feltari mining operations had shut down when their equipment failed and no one knew how to fix it. The Morven agricultural worlds were facing famine because their automated systems had broken down, but all of these problems seemed small when the long-range sensors detected something at the edge of known space. Something that had been sleeping for 300 years was finally waking up. Admiral Gloomith floated in his command tank aboard the flagship of the Galactic Defense Fleet, studying the sensor readings that had arrived just hours before. His bioluminescent patterns showed the deep fear that all Feltari felt when facing the unknown. "Confirm the readings," he ordered his sensor operator. "Confirmed, Admiral. Multiple contacts at grid reference Omega 77. Energy signatures. Match historical records from the Void Hunter archives." The Void Hunters. Every species in the galaxy knew the stories, though most believed they were just legends. Ancient machines that devoured entire star systems, converting matter into energy to fuel their endless expansion. They had disappeared 3 centuries ago, and most beings assumed they had been destroyed or had simply moved beyond the galaxy's borders, but the sensors didn't lie. The Void Hunters were real, they were back, and they were moving toward inhabited space. "How long before they reach the first colony worlds?" Admiral Gloomith asked. "At their current speed, approximately 2 weeks, Admiral." Gloomith's patterns shifted to the bright orange that meant urgent action was required. Send immediate alerts to all member species. Mobilize the defense fleet. We need every ship we can get. The emergency council session was called within hours. Representatives from all the surviving species gathered in the Great Chamber, their faces showing various expressions of fear and confusion. Many of them had never seen a real crisis before. The galaxy had been peaceful for so long that war was just something they read about in history books. High Counselor Vexthara activated the main display, showing the sensor readings from the edge of space. The images were grainy and distorted, but they clearly showed massive structures moving through the void. Ships that were kilometers long, bristling with weapons that could crack planets. "The Void Hunters have returned," she announced, her voice barely steady. "Our analysis suggests they have been dormant in the space between galaxies, but something has awakened them. They are moving toward our territory at maximum speed." Trade Prince Zictal's mandibles clicked frantically. "How is this possible?" "The Void Hunters were defeated centuries ago." "They were never defeated," corrected Admiral Gloomith. "They simply disappeared. The historical records suggest they went dormant after some kind of strategic assessment determined that the galaxy was too well defended to attack profitably." "And now?" asked one of the Morven representatives. Gloomith's patterns dimmed. "Now they appear to believe the situation has changed. The fleet that assembled to meet the Void Hunters was impressive by galactic standards. 200 ships from 12 different species, representing the combined military might of known civilization. Admiral Gloomith commanded from his flagship, a massive Feltari cruiser that could generate enough firepower to destroy a small moon, but as the fleet moved toward the edge of space, problems began to appear. The Zephyrian ships kept losing power because their human-designed engines couldn't be properly maintained. The Kethmori vessels had navigation problems because their human pilots were gone. The coordination systems that allowed different species to fight together had been programmed by human engineers, who were no longer available to fix the bugs. Commander Yixtal of the Kethmori heavy cruiser, Sharpblade, contacted Admiral Gloomith with growing concern. "Admiral, our targeting systems are malfunctioning. The integration protocols with other species' ships are not working correctly. Can your technicians repair them? They are trying, Admiral, but the software was written by humans. We do not understand how it works. Similar reports came in from across the fleet. The weapons that different species had worked together to develop couldn't be fired in coordination. The shields that were supposed to protect the fleet couldn't be synchronized. The communication systems that allowed for complex battle tactics kept breaking down. The fleet that had looked so impressive in the shipyards was revealing itself to be a collection of individual ships that couldn't work together effectively. Without human engineers to maintain the integration systems, without human tacticians to coordinate the complex maneuvers, without human marines to handle boarding actions, the Galactic Defense Force was far weaker than anyone had realized, but they had no choice. The Void Hunters were coming, and the fleet was all that stood between them and billions of innocent lives. The battle took place in the empty space between star systems, far from any inhabited worlds. Admiral Gloomith watched through his ship's sensors as the Void Hunter fleet emerged from hyperspace like a swarm of metallic insects. Their ships were dark and angular, covered with weapons that pulsed with energy that hurt to look at. All ships, attack formation Delta 7, Admiral Gloomith ordered. The Galactic fleet moved forward, but the formation was sloppy. Ships that should have been protecting each other were out of position. Weapons that should have fired and coordinated. Volleys were shooting at random intervals. The beautiful tactical displays that human planners had designed showed chaos instead of order. The Void Hunters responded with mechanical precision. Their ships moved like parts of a single organism, each one perfectly coordinated with the others. When they opened fire, their weapons struck with devastating accuracy, targeting the weak points in each ship's design with knowledge that suggested they had been studying galactic technology for centuries. The first casualty was a Zephyrian destroyer, whose crystal armor shattered under concentrated fire. The ship's death scream echoed across the communication channels as its crew was vaporized instantly. More ships followed as the Void Hunters tore through the galactic formation like it was made of paper. Fall back to defensive positions, Admiral Gloomith ordered, but the fleet was already breaking apart. Ships fled in all directions as their captains realized they were facing an enemy they couldn't defeat. The battle was over in less than 2 hours. Of the 200 ships that had set out to defend the galaxy, fewer than 50 made it back to friendly space. The rest were destroyed, captured, or simply vanished without a trace. Admiral Gloomith floated in his damaged command tank, watching the tactical display show the approaching Void Hunter fleet. They had barely slowed down. The Galactic Defense Force had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience to them. "Send a message to all inhabited systems," he ordered. "Tell them to begin immediate evacuation procedures. We cannot stop them." Far away in human space, Admiral Helen Price stood on the bridge of the Uns Defiant, watching the battle reports come in. She was a tall woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too many wars. Around her, the bridge crew worked quietly, monitoring communications from across the galaxy. "Admiral," reported her communications officer, Lieutenant Tom Garcia, "we're receiving distress calls from multiple systems. The Zephyrian homeworld is requesting immediate military assistance." Admiral Price didn't answer immediately. She had been expecting this moment ever since the Galactic Council had voted to contain humanity. The other species had made their choice, and now they were facing the consequences. "What are our orders regarding assistance to non-human populations?" she asked. Lieutenant Garcia checked his standing orders. "All requests for military aid are to be referred to the Galactic Council for proper authorization through diplomatic channels." "And what does the Council say?" "The Council is no longer in session, Admiral. Most of the representatives have evacuated their homeworlds." Admiral Price nodded slowly. The galaxy that had rejected human involvement was now begging for human help, but it was too late. The Void Hunters had returned, and the species that had voted to contain the Deathworlders were about to face them alone. The Void Hunters moved through the galaxy like a plague of metal locusts, consuming everything in their path. World after world fell to their advance, and the survivors told the same terrible story. The machines didn't just destroy civilizations. They studied them, learned from them, and added their knowledge to an ever-growing database of conquest. High Counselor Vexthera stood in the emergency bunker beneath her homeworld's capital city, listening to reports that grew worse by the hour. Her crystalline form had lost its usual brightness, dimmed by fear and exhaustion. Around her, the last members of the Zephyrian government tried desperately to coordinate a defense that everyone knew was hopeless. "The outer colonies have fallen," reported General Kixthal, his usually confident voice now hollow with defeat. "The Void Hunters have destroyed every defense station in the system. They will reach our homeworld within 6 days." Vexthara closed her multifaceted eyes. 6 days. To prepare for the end of everything her people had built over thousands of years. What about the evacuation ships? 40% of the population has been evacuated to the inner systems. But without human-designed faster-than-light engines, our ships are too slow. The Void Hunters are catching up to the refugee convoys. The terrible irony wasn't lost on anyone in the bunker. The same human technology they had taken for granted was now desperately needed, but the humans were gone. The Zephyrians had voted to contain the dangerous Deathworlders, and now they were dying without them. Across the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out on world after world. The Kethmori had lost their entire trade empire within weeks. Their ships, designed for commerce rather than war, were easy targets for the Void Hunters. Trade Prince Zikdile had died defending his homeworld, his 6 arms still reaching for weapons that couldn't pierce the enemy's armor, the Feltari underwater. Cities offered no protection against enemies who could drain entire oceans. Admiral Gloomuth had made a final stand in the deepest trenches of his homeworld. But the Void Hunters had weapons that turned water to steam and left nothing but empty ocean floors behind. President Laura Martinez sat in the secure conference room deep beneath the North American continent, reading reports that detailed the systematic destruction of galactic civilization. She was a small woman with kind eyes and gray hair, but her expression was harder than steel as she listened to Jake Morrison's briefing. "The Zephyrian homeworld will fall within the week," Jake reported, his voice professionally neutral despite the magnitude of what he was describing. "The Kethmori are extinct. The Feltari have lost 80% of their population. The Morvans are abandoning their agricultural worlds and fleeing toward the galactic core." President Martinez looked around the table at her advisors. "General." Don Cooper sat silently, his scarred face showing no emotion. Secretary of Defense Carol Wright took notes on a tablet, her fingers moving quickly across the screen. Intelligence Director Paul Johnson studied satellite images of the devastation with the detached interest of a scientist examining bacteria. "What about requests for assistance?" the president asked. Jake's mouth twitched slightly. "They're arriving." "Hourly, Madam President. Every surviving government in the galaxy has sent formal requests for military aid. They're offering everything they have: technology, resources, territorial concessions, anything we want. And our response? The same as always. We refer them to the Galactic Council for proper authorization, since the Council no longer exists. As a functioning body, we cannot provide assistance without proper diplomatic approval. It was a perfect bureaucratic trap. The same species that had voted to restrict human involvement were now discovering that their own rules prevented them from getting help. They had created a system designed to control humanity, and now that system was ensuring their destruction. General Cooper spoke for the first time during the meeting. Intelligence reports suggest the Void Hunters have been monitoring galactic politics for centuries. They've been waiting for exactly this moment when the galaxy's defenses were weakest and most disorganized. "You think they planned this?" asked Secretary Wright. "I think they're smart enough to recognize opportunity when they see it. For 300 years, they watched humanity become the galaxy's unofficial police force. We were the ones who handled the dangerous situations, the ones who kept the peace, the ones who maintained the technology that held everything together. When the Council voted to remove us from that role, He shrugged. The Void Hunters knew it was time to return. President Martinez turned to her intelligence director. Paul, what do we know about their capabilities? Director Johnson activated the main display, showing tactical analyses of the Void Hunter attacks. They're using weapons and strategies specifically designed to counter each species' strengths. Against the Zephyrians, they deploy crystalline disruptors that shatter their armor. Against the Kethmori, they use electromagnetic pulses that interfere with their navigation systems. Against the Feltari, they have molecular weapons that can boil oceans. They've been studying us, General Cooper added. All of us, for centuries. They've been watching and learning, preparing for the day when they could strike with maximum effectiveness. What about human defenses? The president asked. General Cooper's expression didn't change. They've been studying us too, Madam President. But we've been studying them as well. The truth was slowly emerging through intercepted communications and surviving records from destroyed worlds. For 3 centuries, humanity had been secretly fighting a shadow war against Void Hunter advance scouts and infiltration attempts. Captain Steve Johnson had been running covert operations against their reconnaissance vessels. Dr. Rachel Kim had been developing countermeasures against their adaptive technology. Colonel Matt Wilson had been training special forces units, specifically to fight machine intelligences. The other species had never known about any of it. While they debated trade agreements and territorial disputes in the council chambers, humans had been quietly protecting them from threats they didn't even know existed. The galactic civilization that had flourished for thousands of years had only been possible because humanity had been standing guard in the darkness, and now the guard was gone. Dr. Rachel Kim stood in her laboratory on Luna Station, reviewing the data her research teams had collected over decades of secret study. She was a brilliant woman with short black hair and eyes that missed nothing. Around her, banks of computers processed information about Void Hunter technology that had been gathered at great cost in human lives. The quantum resonance patterns suggest they're using some kind of collective intelligence, she explained to the assembled military leaders. Each ship is connected to a central processing network that allows perfect coordination across vast distances. Admiral Helen Price studied the technical displays with professional interest. Can we disrupt the network? Theoretically, yes. We've been developing interference patterns for decades. But deployment would require getting close to their command vessels, and that means engaging them directly. Which we're not authorized to do, General Cooper added, his voice heavy with irony. The Galactic Council was very clear that human military forces were too dangerous to be deployed outside our territory. President Martinez looked around the room at her military and scientific advisors. Ladies and gentlemen, we're facing a decision that will define humanity's place in the galaxy for generations to come. We can follow the Council's restrictions and watch civilization burn, or we can act unilaterally to stop a threat that we helped create through our withdrawal. Madam President, Jake Morrison said quietly, there is a third option. Everyone turned to look at the former ambassador. His expression was carefully neutral, but there was something cold in his eyes that made several people uncomfortable. We wait, he continued. We let the Void Hunters finish what they started. When the dust settles, when the other species have learned the full cost of their arrogance, then we negotiate from a position of absolute strength. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Jake was suggesting that humanity should let the galaxy burn completely before offering to help rebuild it. It was a strategy that would cement human dominance for centuries to come, but it would also mean the deaths of billions of innocent beings. President Martinez closed her eyes and considered the weight of the decision. The species that had voted to contain humanity were now paying the ultimate price for their mistake. The question was whether humanity would save them from their own arrogance, or let them learn the hard lesson that the galaxy had always needed its Deathworlders. Outside the conference room, communication officers continued to receive desperate pleas for help from across the galaxy. The messages were all the same: entire worlds dying, civilizations collapsing, billions of beings crying out for salvation that might never come. The day Deathworlders ceased playing nice had reached its Moment of truth, and humanity alone would decide the galaxy's fate? 3 years had passed since the first Void Hunter attack, and the galaxy was a graveyard. Entire star systems lay silent and dark, their worlds stripped bare of life and resources. The great trade routes that had connected thousands of civilizations for millennia were now haunted shipping lanes where only scavengers dared to travel. Ambassador Kane Phillips walked through the ruins of what had once been the greatest space station in the galaxy. The Harmony Station had been a symbol of galactic unity, a place where all species could meet in peace. Now it was a twisted wreck of metal and crystal, its corridors filled with debris and the echoes of the dead. Kane was a middle-aged man with tired eyes and premature gray hair. As humanity's new representative to what remained of the galactic community, he had the thankless job of negotiating with the survivors. Behind him walked his aide, Lieutenant Mary Foster, a young woman who took careful notes of everything they saw. They entered what had been the main council chamber, where the 7 surviving species had gathered for an emergency meeting. The once mighty Galactic Council was now a handful of frightened beings huddled in a damaged room, begging for help from the people they had once tried to control. High Counselor Vextara was still alive, though her crystalline form was cracked and dim. Half of her homeworld's population had died in the Void Hunter attacks, and the survivors lived in underground shelters, afraid to rebuild on the surface. Trade Prince Merkal had replaced the dead Zictal as the leader of the few remaining Kethmori, but their once great shipping empire was reduced to a handful of damaged freighters. Ambassador Phillips, Vexthara said, her voice barely audible through the translation system. Thank you for coming. We need to discuss the future. Kane took his seat at the small table that had replaced the grand platforms of the old council chamber. I'm here to listen to your proposal, Counselor. We were wrong, she said simply. We made a terrible mistake when we voted to restrict human expansion. We understand that now. We're willing to reverse that decision completely. Humanity can have unrestricted access to any territory in the galaxy. You can expand wherever you wish, build whatever you need, do whatever you think is best. Kane nodded politely but said nothing. He had been expecting this offer. Trade Prince Merkal spoke next, his mandibles clicking nervously. We're also prepared to offer exclusive trade agreements. Humanity can have preferential access to all our resources and markets. No tariffs, no restrictions, no bureaucracy. Additionally, added Admiral Quolam, the new leader of the Feltari survivors, we're willing to share all our remaining technology. Our scientific databases, our cultural archives, our military secrets, everything we have is yours if you'll help us rebuild. Kane listened to offer after offer, each more desperate than the last. The surviving species were willing to give humanity everything they had ever wanted and more. They would accept human leadership, human laws, human protection. They would become client states, vassals, anything that would ensure their survival. When they finished speaking, Kane was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked around the table at the broken representatives of once proud civilizations. Your offers are very generous, he said finally, but I'm afraid they're not enough. The color drained from Vexthara's crystalline form. What? What? Do you mean? You seem to think this is a negotiation, Kane explained, his voice calm and professional. You're offering us things in exchange for our help. But that's not how this works anymore. He stood up and walked to the damaged view screen that showed the dead systems beyond the station. For 300 years, humanity protected this galaxy. We fought threats you never even knew existed. We maintained the technology that kept your civilizations running. We were the immune system that prevented disasters like the Void Hunters from destroying everything you built. Kane turned back to face the assembled survivors. And you repaid us by voting to restrict our expansion because you thought we were too dangerous. You decided that the galaxy would be safer without human involvement. So we gave you exactly what you asked for. Trade Prince Merkal's mandibles clicked frantically. But we didn't know. We didn't understand how much we depended on you. That's exactly the problem, Kane replied. You never bothered to understand. You made decisions about our people based on fear and ignorance, and now you want us to save you from the consequences. Admiral Korlama's bioluminescent patterns pulsed with desperation. Please, Ambassador, billions of innocent beings have died. Our children had nothing to do with the Council's vote. They don't deserve to suffer for our mistakes. Kane's expression softened slightly. You're right. The children don't deserve this. That's why humanity has been providing humanitarian aid to refugee populations. We've evacuated over 100 million beings to safe zones within human space. We've provided food, medical care, and shelter to anyone who asks for it. But no military aid, Vexthara said quietly. No military aid, Kane confirmed. The Galactic Council was very clear that human military forces were too dangerous to be deployed outside our territory. We're simply following that guidance. The survivors sat in stunned silence as they realized the full scope of their situation. Humanity would keep them alive, but it would not save their civilizations. The great species that had once ruled the galaxy would survive as refugees under human protection, but they would never again be independent powers. What happens now? Asked Trade Prince Merkel. Kane returned to his seat and opened a folder that Lieutenant Foster handed him. Now we discuss the terms of your integration into human space. We're prepared to offer full citizenship to any beings who wish to accept it. You'll have the same rights and protections as any human citizen, but you'll also be subject to human law and human authority. And if we refuse? Vexthara asked. Then you're free to rebuild your civilizations on your own, Kane replied. Humanity won't interfere. Of course, we also won't provide any assistance if the Void Hunters return, and our intelligence suggests they will return eventually. The choice was simple and brutal. Accept human rule and live in safety, or maintain independence and face the next crisis alone. It wasn't really a choice at all. One by one, the surviving species signed the integration agreements. The Zephyrians would become citizens of the Human Colonial Alliance. The Kethmori would join the Human Trade Federation. The Feltari would be incorporated into the human deep space territories. The Great Galactic Council was officially dissolved, replaced by the Human Interstellar Government. The species that had once voted to contain humanity were now protectorates. Under human authority, 50 years later, children across human space learned about the old Galactic Council in their history classes. They studied the vote that had tried to restrict human expansion and the 3 years of chaos that followed. The lesson was always the same. Respect must be earned through strength, and independence comes with the responsibility to protect yourself. The surviving alien species lived comfortable lives as human citizens. They had good jobs, safe homes, and protected rights. But they were no longer independent peoples with their own governments and territories. They were minorities in a human-dominated galaxy, living under the protection of the same species they had once tried to control. In the depths of space, automated sensors detected movement in the darkness between galaxies. The Void Hunters were stirring again, preparing for another assault on the galaxy they had failed to fully conquer. But this time, they would face a united human empire that controlled every major star system and military installation. The galaxy had learned its lesson about the dangers of rejecting those who protect them. But the lesson had come at a price that could never be repaid. The day Deathworlders ceased playing nice had ended not with humanity's destruction, but with humanity's total victory. And in the quiet corners of human space, the descendants of the old galactic species told their children stories about the time when their people had been free and independent. They spoke of crystal cities and great trade empires, of underwater kingdoms and peaceful worlds that existed before the vote that changed everything, but they always ended with the same warning: never bite the hand that protects you, because some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. The Deathworlders had ceased playing nice, and the galaxy would never be the same.